So I have a question for LA. You said you're planning to undo the flexibility of the SB 163 dollars. Does that mean that the dollars will now follow the child, or will they still be used for the whole WRAP program, flexible between cases, but not flexible to be used for anything but wraparound?
Well, LA's and LA and Alameda counties are in the 4E waiver. So we're sort of disconnected from the 163 impetus for wraparound right now. So this new RFSQ will, which will come into effect with the new, probably somewhat a new set of providers in November of 2014, will not be kind of guided by 163. So again, it will have a case rate. We've kind of suggested, after working with providers, that probably the average monthly cost of a child who's in wraparound is about $4,200. And we are suggesting that 60% of that cost can be claimed to EPSDT and 40% of that cost to a case rate. That kind of flips the existing model, which is 60% case rate and 40% EPSDT. Providers who were given EPSDT dollars under wraparound until this point, until this flexibility idea is reversed, could spend those EPSDT dollars not providing wraparound. They could, for example, as I think you're suggesting, you could take a kid who's in wraparound, graduate him or her from the wraparound program, and use those wraparound dollars to continue to provide mental health services. Or you could just use those wraparound intentionate dollars to do any other kind of mental health services, as long as you were providing them to a child with an open child welfare case. But we're going to want providers to just use those dollars now for wraparound. They would be able to use them in the sense that you're talking about. So if a child graduates from wraparound, we have always said that you can continue to provide services using your wraparound funds for kids who are just moving out of the wraparound program.
Question for, I think it's LA County that has an information sharing protocol. Is that a document that you can share?
No.
Please?
I'm sorry. Yes. We're working on updating it right now, because with this new idea that I mentioned about us being able to make child welfare information available to mental health. So as soon as that update is in, I think then we could certainly share it.
Could I just add a perspective? I think having a judge that made some local rules is incredibly powerful here. If you've read not the Blue Ribbon Commission report, the document that AOC released about 18 months ago relative to information sharing, go get that and take it to your benches, your bench officers, and ask one of them to just run with it. Because they all but tell judges in there that while you have to prescribe to HIPAA and confidentiality, local rules can be flexed and mitigations can be put in place, and that document's pretty powerful to that end. So you can write some of those limits into MOUs and into contracts that allow you to share information, and then you just disclose it to your families and children when they come in your system.
I mean, the interesting challenge here is that once you've identified you have a common client, there are rules, regulations, laws, and so forth that would allow you to share information for the purposes of coordinating care. The difficulty is there's a kind of a pre-step to that. You have to know that you have a shared client, and that's what can make information. That first step is the tricky part. And in this case, the judge's order has allowed us to do that.
Couple questions, one for LA. Can you tell us what the Title 4E waiver has done for you? And for Placer, what kind of agreements do you have for the sandboxes in other counties for the out-of-county placements?
Well, for us, in terms of 4E, it has, it's provided some additional flexibility for DCFS to cover some of our costs. So DCFS, for example, provides the lion's share of the local match for the kids who are in the child welfare system for us to use to leverage EPSDT. And so we've established, again, a financial MOU, as Darlene mentioned. We have what's called a departmental services order, which is a vehicle to kind of move money from one department to the next. We have, because of our data sharing abilities, we're able to look to see what was the cost of providing a service, and DCFS has agreed to pay for the local match to do that.
So if I understand the question, it's relative to what documents or MOUs are in place. There is a 5th generation MOU between all of the policy board members. So the agencies that participate in the children's system of care each sign an MOU, and it's gone through 5 iterations since 1988. It has elements of information sharing, elements relative to service provision, and mostly it's a guiding set of principles and functions that each agency will bring to the sandbox, if you will. The co-located organizations that are private nonprofits that are with us in our clinics all have contracts. They're on contracts. So within those contracts, there are usual kind of contractual elements. And the only thing that's unique that I could suggest is that there's just an acknowledgement in the contract that they are going to have access to hardware, email, toner, chairs. I mean, we're going to provide that to them, and it's a cost offset for them. We don't give it a hard cost usually. It's just part of doing business in the Placer sandbox.
Don't be shy.
Not really. I'm not the expert in it. So there are the real marriage historically is between mental health and child welfare. There's a unified service plan, but we have to access CWS CMS, of course. We track mental health services via Avatar. So there's no unique information database. So we have some local databases. They're Excel-based, really. They're very basic around how we track some of those bridges between the two. But beyond that, there's no special database in Placer. I suppose if we had huge numbers, we might have spent some time working on that. But it hasn't. We don't think it has value.
That was one of my questions. The other one is LA County was talking about case rates as opposed to EPSDT funding for some of these provider contracts. Can you talk about where the funding comes from to provide a case rate payment to a provider for mental health services?
Let's see, where does case rate come from? Cheryl. It's 4E funding. Yeah.
So it's child welfare service funding, not mental
Right,
health funding.
right.
Thank you.
I would just add contextually that the hard capitated rates have been practiced in other models, private business models in healthcare and mental health for 20 years plus in our country. So it's just in kind of government-held services that this is kind of a new concept. So there are all sorts of models out there whereby the actuaries run costs based upon utilization and then assign a hard cap to it. And then the agency's given X dollars, and you have to provide every service that person could need within that hard cap, right? So there are textbooks that have been out there for decades around capitated behavioral healthcare services, and that's a good place to start.
LA referenced CFS providing the local match for EPSDT. Are you talking about just the 5%? And related to that, how does realignment of the state match or the state...
It's made a mess of things, hasn't it? We had a 6.81% match for a number of years, and that was pretty understandable. Now with realignment, I would say we've spent probably the better part of a year just trying to understand what that means. I don't think DCFS is prepared or able to provide a 50% match. We've been trying to work with the folks at the state to better, and in some cases our plaintiff attorneys are also involved in this discussion to try to clarify how how this realigned dollar then gets distributed to the counties. And I think in the early days of that, our county was sort of holding back and saying we don't want to sort of grow. We want to kind of stay put here and not have any additional allocations made. And at this point, I think we've done not a 360, but probably a 90-degree turn on that. And our director is of the opinion that it's going to be good for us to try to expand our EPSDT services somewhat beyond, within limits, somewhat beyond what they have been, and that counties that do not do that will probably end up losing some of their state trickle-down dollars, and our county might benefit from that, and probably counties who are a little bit aggressive will benefit from that as well. One thing also that I just mentioned is that we haven't talked that much about treatment foster care, but along with wraparound and intensive care coordination, the core practice model, intensive home-based services, the other big service driver related to KDA, both in our county case and in the state case, is treatment foster care. And that's proven to be a little more of a difficult model for people, I think, to kind of understand and to try to think about the funding of it and who's entitled to it and how to set up a program. I know the state's working on that right now and coming up with a TFC model and hopefully a guide by the end of this year or so, which will help counties sort of figure that out. It's been one of our biggest challenges in LA. I'm not sure exactly why that's the case, but the judge actually ordered us to, had a specific order for LA to develop 300 treatment foster care beds. We had none when we began this process. And we have spent now 6 years trying to develop that capacity. Right now, I think we have 100 kids in treatment foster care. Part of that is due to the fact that LA has a huge shortage of foster homes in general. And so it's difficult sometimes to get parents to, who maybe been comfortable with the whole foster care concept in general, to think about taking a very high needs young person. So, but that's been a very gradual growth program for us, and it may be in your counties as well when the treatment foster care mandate comes out.
Yeah, we are working with the feds to get a proposal paper to the feds and to try to get approval for that. So on redoing the manuals, it's not going to be in January, but we're going to try to work as closely or as quickly as we can to get that TFC up and running and get it into the Medi-Cal manuals, in addition to the ICC and the IHBS. So that's where we're at right now. And it is a negotiation process between the plaintiffs and the state and everybody involved, so it's very complicated.
Here we go.
Well, thank you very much.
We have one more. Can we
Oh.
have one more?
I wonder if being a waiver county for LA makes any difference in your ability to do what you do versus another county who isn't?
You know, I don't know because I'm not another county, but I think it does. I mean, I'm thinking back to our pre-waiver days and our waiver days, and I think the financial relationship between mental health and child welfare has been improved by that flexibility. I know there's always anxiety about staying in the waiver, and I think there's anxiety that if for some reason that the county went out of the waiver, that we would have really a lot of work to do to redesign things. So I take by that kind of discussion that this has been a helpful process for us.
Greg, I have a question. If you could do it all over again in the last 6 years or 7 years of working on this, what thing would you emphasize first on your to-do list in getting? I know that LA's settlement is a little bit different than the states, but what would you really emphasize first and foremost in getting it going?
Well, I think we kind of stumbled upon it because we really had to figure out a way to identify who these kids were. So, and I've been in some conversations with other counties about this, and there's just confusion about how many kids do I have in the subclass, and what makes a subclass member, and how do I know if they're a class member, those kind of things. And for, probably for middle and, I mean, if you can count them on your hand, you're in good shape, but for middle and larger counties, they're in the hundreds and thousands, and you may not be exactly sure who they are, and you may not have a system in place to sort of screen kids. So I think the first thing we had to do, which in hindsight was probably what most folks may have to do who have larger numbers of kids here, is identify some way to figure out who the kids are in the child welfare system are who might be in need of mental health services, whether or not that's a screening process, or if you can swing it, maybe you can get all kids referred for assessments, kind of avoid that screening process. Now, whether or not that screening is an assessment, whether or not that screening process is done by mental health or child welfare, I think you can do it either way, depending on what makes sense for you. I say we chose to do it with child welfare doing the screening, then referring the cases to us, but mental health could take that on. I know San Bernardino does it that way, and that's certainly fine. But you have to find some way to get that in place. Then you have to find the second step in that is then you have to find some way to exchange information so you can keep track of who those kids are. Otherwise, you have no way of kind of identifying your progress. So I think it's the screening process that has to take place first, and there has to be some way to exchange information so that you can identify who the kids are you have in common and see what kind of services those kids are getting.
Thank you very much. How's your finger doing? Good.
It's very sore, Troy.
Okay. Send the bill to the state, right, for the finger massage. With that, I think we're going to start wrapping it up in a few minutes. So how do we want to
I
do
think
that?
Cheryl is volunteered to do closing remarks.
Okay, I'll keep them brief. So I think we heard a lot today. I heard the word shared used a lot. I heard crisis situations being turned into opportunities. I really like the idea of Mendocino County not being worried about drawing down the dollars, but making sure that practice drove their system design. I think that's really critical because sometimes we always try to figure out how to pay for it first instead of figuring out what kids need. I heard shared a lot. So that really tells you that you really have to invest some time into that. And I heard investing time in the conversation and investing time in relationships. I think that is real critical through this whole process. So I want to thank you all for coming. I want to put a plug in real quick for our Wraparound Institute that's now being called Partnerships Wellbeing. I think there's flyers out there on the table, and we're still looking for workshops. It's going to be another dynamic one. So if you've never attended, some of you, I encourage you to come because you get to see some really nice things. Get to see me dance and do some other stuff. Also, I think stay tuned for more of these, more webinars, more forums like this. Our commitment at the state is to provide as much of the resources that we can give to you as you roll this out and to bring experts and subject matter expertise before you. So look forward to more of the same of this. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Please do your evaluations.
Do your
Please complete
evaluation.
your evaluations. We actually